Hello everyone, I'm Judge Penny Wolfgang, and welcome to The Big Picture. New Yorkers aged 21 and older can now legally possess and consume cannabis, more commonly known as marijuana. Governor Andrew Cuomo recently signed legislation to legalize adult recreational use, creating the country's second largest marijuana market. This will change so much for so many. We're going to get the big picture on what this means legally from attorney Elise Bergio, who joins us through Zoom technology. And Elise is the cannabis team leader for the law firm Barclay Damon. Elise began her legal career in Portland, Oregon, where she represented and advised cannabis businesses on medical and adult use regulation issues. Joining us also in studio is Matthew Smith, Executive Director of Prevention Focus, a not-for-profit agency offering programs and strategies to prevent drug abuse and promote health. So welcome to both of you with two very different perspectives on marijuana. Elise, we're going to start with you. Will this be a boom for businesses, opening up revenue opportunities for entrepreneurs, which everybody thinks it will? Will it?
Hi, Judge. Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely. It's projected over the course of the next 5 years that the marijuana industry will be at $350 million, expected to exceed when you think about ancillary businesses, so outside businesses participating into the billions. And so it's looking very economical. It's one of those topics that I think at the start of the conversation, Governor Cuomo is using it as a way to rectify a deficit in the budget. That's obviously changed given the bill that passed, which was a very progressive social equity enforced bill. But now with the way that the license structure is happening, with the way that, just as you said earlier on in your introduction, this is expected to be the second largest, right behind California in terms of an adult use market. So it's going to be an interesting market.
Well, there are already businesses operating that dispense marijuana medically. So does this mean that they can now sell and dispense marijuana for anyone that wants to come in their location and purchase marijuana?
Not right now. So what happens in the timeline from, when the bill was signed, which was on March 31st, to, the near future is within 6 months, we're most likely going to have rules and regulations. And with those rules and regulations, we have the specifications in place that establish the security, how marijuana is supposed to be dispensed, what operators need to do in order to be able to sell adult use marijuana and to whom, what process. So medical marijuana dispensaries will have to wait for that to happen in order for them to be able to sell to consumer.
So Matt, I wasn't ignoring you. We're gonna get to you, I assure you. Until now, marijuana has been illegal to possess and use recreationally, although, as we know, from statistics and from common sense, people have just used it anyway. So some say to help them medically, but many because of the way it makes them feel. So as a leader in prevention, does this legalization go against everything that you have been working for over the past years?
Well, we've worked very, very hard to try to stop this from occurring as a field. We really have some serious concerns about what this could mean down the road, but basically we've been dealing with legal substances also, for very, very many years. And what this really does for the prevention field in an area of public policy is it kind of makes us shift gears. Instead of spending an awful lot of time and energy trying to delay or prevent this from occurring, now that this has occurred, we'll shift our gears to doing things to try to keep people as safe as possible and as healthy as possible and try to mitigate any harms that could happen as a result.
Now, that argument we've heard from many people who are against legalizing marijuana is that it is a quote-unquote gateway drug. Mm-hmm. Is that true to others that are illegal? Is that true do you find that's true? Do you know if that's true? Is that a valid argument? While
many, people who progress to quote-unquote harder drugs, they use marijuana before that. That's very true of many people. But there are also very many people who use marijuana, and that's as far as it goes. We are concerned a little bit about really smoking and inhaling as a gateway skill in terms of learning how to do 2 other drugs, to tell you the truth. It is what it is. It doesn't necessarily mean because a person tries marijuana, they're destined to do other drugs for sure.
What about, you just mentioned that word smoking. What about, we're trying, I don't know how many generations now we've tried to, and succeeded, I think, in get many people to stop smoking because of the danger of smoking. Is this possibly going to increase the use of cigarettes?
Well, there's certainly some smoking going on. We don't know what that'll necessarily mean. I do know that some of the same things that prevention field has employed to address smoking over the years are certainly going to be in play. Back in the era of black and white TVs and the golden age of Hollywood, it would appear that most people smoked. As a matter of fact, the numbers were actually close to 40% of people were smokers before the Surgeon General report came out linking cigarette smoking to cancer. And now it's about half of that. And that didn't happen by itself. That happened as a result of people at the grassroots level being very, very proactive, and organizations like ours that have worked very hard to give people the facts. Somebody had to say, hey, put a warning label on the cigarette packs. Somebody had to say, remove the cigarettes from in front of the store clerk at the 7-Eleven where a kid could steal it and start smoking, and put it behind the clerk where it's harder to get.
One step after another.
All of these things, add up to a lower rate of use, and we'll apply some of those same strategies to this too.
Right. So Elise, from what you've seen in your work in Portland, Oregon, how have the concerns of those that Matt just mentioned, how have they been handled in other places like Oregon, where it has been legal for some time?
Yeah, and Matt made a lot of great points in his explanation of how they're transitioning and pivoting to now looking at it from a different angle now that it's legalized. In Oregon, and what's going to end up happening in New York, is it's very difficult to get the research, the technology, the education involved without the tax revenue generated from legalizing the product. And so part of this plan that the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act did was revenue generated is going to go back into education for the public, research to make sure that we're identifying whether or not the effects of marijuana do have long-term consequences. How we're going to be able to tell if impaired driving will be tested with a type of device. So that really can only happen through the legalization process, because otherwise, where are you finding the money unless it's through a private vendor? And that's a really big, important, point for public health purposes. And so Oregon's had a few years to really jumpstart that process, and most of their revenue was going back into public health and education. So I'm sure there's been a lot of progress there.
Now, there is an opt-out clause that municipalities can act on by passing their own local law. Elise, have you seen that in other places? Have they taken advantage of that, or did they have that option?
Yeah, so actually opt-out provisions are very popular. They're in most of the adult use bills that have passed within the 14, 15 states that have legalized adult use. Ours is a little bit more unique because it doesn't allow counties to do so. It's cities, local government, and towns. And so what's interesting about our opt-out provisions is it opts you out from having a retail store or an on-site consumption lounge. It does not opt you out of possession or use of marijuana.
Right. Yeah. As a crime or a different legislation, it's a different area of the law. There's a provision, Matt, in the state legislation that reviews how this may impact traffic safety. And do you know if, for example, there's been a rise in accidents, or when I should ask Elise this too, what are the laws like for driving under the influence, and how will this affect it?
Well, that's an important point, and that's ongoing. I think what I would like to revisit before we forget is that opt-out clause. I mean, numbers of outlets are a huge impact in terms of rates of use. We've seen this with alcohol, we've seen this with tobacco historically. And people need to be aware that if they don't want these establishments in their towns, there are steps they could take, but they don't have very much time. They've got 9 months to get the signatures that they need to get these opt-outs enacted. So that's really important.
We already saw some of the towns, at least the supervisors around here, making comments that we're going to opt out. I don't know if they've done it legally yet or not. Right. Elise, what about the driving, the accidents and so forth? Have you seen that in the other jurisdictions?
So there's been a lot of studies regarding impairment. It's, again, as we talked about, it's difficult to identify whether or not marijuana has been ingested, consumed, or inhaled prior to entering a vehicle. And so those studies have a little bit of a difficult time because marijuana actually can stay in your system for up to a month and metabolizes very differently in each person, which is where this problem occurs, right? And the studies have kind of shown whether or not there's been accidents, whether they believe the driver was impaired under the influence of marijuana through their observational process. But I think we still have a long way to go. Really, the effects of these bills have been through the stop and frisk policies, meaning using marijuana odor as an opportunity to, go through a person's vehicle and things of that nature.
I was just talking about that with John before we went on the air, and we're going to talk a little more about that too, as well as the legalization and the other issues. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion on what the legalization of recreational marijuana means when it becomes to the criminal records, when it comes to criminal records, and some of the other issues that we've brought up. So we'll be right back.